My name is Madeline Carter, and 5 years ago, I walked away from a $1 billion family legacy to open a struggling little bookstore on the forgotten side of Chicago. They called it a waste, said I was throwing my degree, my future, my name, into the trash. But what they didn't know was that while they mocked me from their glass towers, I was quietly building an empire beneath their feet. If you've ever been dismissed by your own family or told your dreams were too small to matter, leave a comment and tell me your story. And don't forget to subscribe, because what happened next, no one saw coming. The bell above the door let out its usual soft chime as a customer exited without buying anything. It was a sound I'd grown used to, a quiet farewell in a place the world had mostly forgotten. But to me, the winding shelf wasn't just a bookstore tucked between a shuttered bakery and a pawn shop on the quieter side of West Madison Street. It was home. Every worn floorboard, every crooked shelf, every dog-eared copy of a novel someone once loved, it all meant something. Because I built this from nothing. When I walked away from the Carter family estate, away from marble floors, private jets, and a last name that opened doors, I knew what I was giving up. I also knew what I was reclaiming. Freedom, purpose, the right to be small without being stepped on. I graduated top of my class from Wharton, and instead of joining Carter and Rowe Development like everyone expected, I cashed out my trust fund and opened a bookstore. That decision didn't sit well with my family. Bradley called it reckless. "You've got an MBA and a brain," he said once, shaking his head at the cramped little space I'd leased in downtown Chicago. "Why are you playing cashier when you could be VP of acquisitions?" Vanessa was less subtle. "This is cute," she said during her one and only visit. "It reminds me of a school fundraiser, except sadder." To them, success came in square footage and quarterly earnings. They didn't understand why I'd trade penthouse meetings for dusty shelves, or why I found more joy in finding the right book for a lonely teenager than in closing multi-million-dollar land deals. But this place, this fading corner of the city, gave me something their towers of glass and chrome never could: stillness. And in that stillness, I was building something far bigger than they ever imagined. Something real. They thought I left the family business because I couldn't handle it. The truth was, I left because I saw it for what it was. A machine that rewarded obedience and punished difference. And I was never meant to be a piece that fit. So I stayed here, at the winding shelf, through quiet mornings and long nights, through months where I barely broke even, through endless lectures from Bradley about missed opportunities, through pitying glances from Vanessa when I showed up to family dinners in bookstore clothes instead of couture. But I never asked for their approval. I never needed it. Because while they spent their lives climbing ladders someone else built for them, I was laying foundations of my own. One book, one shelf, one choice at a time. The door chimed again. But this time, it wasn't a customer. I didn't even have to look up. I recognized the rhythm of the heels before they crossed the threshold. Sharp, intentional, rehearsed. Vanessa always walked like she owned whatever ground she stepped on. Bradley followed behind, predictably overdressed for this part of town. Dark tailored suit, gold cufflinks, a smirk that said he thought this visit was a favor. "Still playing shopkeeper, Madeline?" Vanessa's voice cut through the stillness like a paper-thin blade. She paused just inside the doorway, her eyes already scanning the store with an air of distant amusement. "Thought you'd be gone by now. Or, I don't know, selling journals on Etsy." Bradley stepped forward, his gaze dropping to the invoices I had been sorting on the counter. "We won't take much of your time. Just here to give you a heads up. Dad's retiring next week. He's announcing it at the annual shareholders meeting." I nodded. Slowly. It wasn't a surprise. George Carter had been easing out of day-to-day operations for years, letting Bradley make louder decisions with less wisdom. "So, it's official then," I said quietly. Bradley smiled. Carter and Rowe stays in the family. I'll be taking over as CEO. Vanessa folded her arms, leaning against a nearby bookshelf like it offended her to stand on its own. You could have had a seat at that table. You know, all you had to do was follow the plan. I didn't reply. I just looked at her, at both of them, thinking of the last time we were all in the same room without it ending in silence. Bradley tapped the counter, like he was trying to draw attention back to his news. Also, this building, the entire block. Actually, Carter Group closed on it last week. My heart didn't stop, but it stumbled. We're converting the strip into luxury condos, Vanessa added, examining her nails like the words were barely worth saying. You'll need to vacate. 30 days. She dropped a thick envelope onto the counter. The weight of it landed heavier than it should have. I picked it up, already knowing what I'd find inside. But I opened it anyway. The legal tone, the formal notice, and the date stamped in bold. And at the bottom, George Carter's signature. It's one thing to be ignored by your family. It's another to be erased by them on paper. This store is my lease. This block is my life, I said. Not quite to them. Bradley raised an eyebrow. It's just a building, Madeline. Just some crumbling brick on the wrong side of downtown. No one reads physical books anymore, Vanessa chimed in. Honestly, it's sad. You're clinging to this place like it's a legacy. She gestured toward a sun-faded display of poetry anthologies. We'll send a crew to help clear it out. You know, make it easier for you. Bradley checked his watch. We've got a meeting at Barclay and Pierce in 20. Just thought we'd deliver the news in person. He paused at the door, glancing back over his shoulder. It's not too late to come back. You know, Dad might still make room for you. If you ask. Vanessa's laugh was soft but cruel. Begging can be very cathartic. The bell chimed again as they left, heels tapping the sidewalk like a punctuation mark. I stood there for a long moment, the envelope still in my hand. Then, I placed it down beside the open ledger. 30 days. Signed by my father. They thought they were ending something, but they had no idea what they'd just started. The bell had barely stopped ringing when I reached beneath the counter and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady, my voice even. I didn't need time to think. I'd already done that. 5 years of it. Nathan. I said when the line connected. He answered on the second ring. I saw the news. I take it they delivered the papers. They did. I said calmly. It's time. Execute Plan B. There was a brief pause on the other end. Are you certain they just served me an eviction notice? For my own building. I replied. I've never been more certain. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket, then leaned against the counter, letting the silence of the store wrap around me like a second skin. Out on the street, Vanessa and Bradley disappeared into a black town car, confident they had just closed a chapter in my life. But the truth was, they'd only triggered the next one. The winding shelf had always been more than a bookstore. On paper, it barely broke even, which made it the perfect place to disappear, to hide in plain sight. Let them think I was sentimental. Let them think I was stuck. The world saw a struggling shop with uneven lighting and mismatched chairs. But behind the scenes, the winding shelf was the headquarters of something much larger, Athena Digital Publishing. They didn't know the servers in the back room ran around the clock, that under a shelf labeled Rare Classics was a secure fiber line directly connected to our cloud infrastructure, that the old ledger book I kept on the counter was just a cover for the secure tablet inside, encrypted and authenticated with my retina scan. I didn't build Athena to prove them wrong. I built it because the publishing industry needed it. While Carter and Rowe were buying up Concrete and Skyline, I was building the foundation of the next chapter in digital learning. University systems, public libraries, and private firms. All of them had migrated to our platform in the last 2 years. And no one, not even Bradley, who once bragged that he could smell a new tech startup from miles away, had ever suspected that the woman behind it all was the sister he called naive. They had no idea that the moment they dismissed me was the moment I became untouchable. Athena had grown quietly, strategically. We didn't chase headlines. We built infrastructure. We signed distribution deals with every major publishing house. We digitized over 2 million volumes in 3 years. We secured government contracts, university archives, and medical databases. While Carter and Rowe measured success in square footage, I was measuring it in access, in literacy, in control. And now, thanks to a small mistake on their part, I had every legal and personal reason to act. They thought they were evicting me. They didn't realize they'd just declared war on their silent shareholder. I glanced around the winding shelf, the place that grounded me, that reminded me of why I started. This was never the end game. It was the launch pad. By the time Bradley stepped into that shareholders' meeting next week, I wouldn't just be the sister with a useless bookstore. I'd be the one signing the order to restructure his entire empire. Most people thought Athena Digital was just another tech startup, another blip in the endless sea of platforms promising to change the way the world learns. That was by design. The less they noticed us, the more room we had to grow. Quietly, precisely, relentlessly, in 5 years. Athena had gone from a two-person concept to the backbone of academic publishing in North America. We didn't take out billboards or sponsor galas. We didn't need to. While other startups chased attention, we chased utility, and universities took notice. So did the government. So did the very publishers who once swore they'd never digitize their archives. Athena made it easy, and secure, and profitable. From Ivy League institutions to community colleges, from public libraries in small towns to elite research hospitals, everyone used Athena. By the time most of the industry realized how dependent they were on our infrastructure, we were already too deeply embedded to replace, and all of it, every contract, every server, every silent takeover, was signed under my hand, not Madeline Carter. Of course, that name was too loud, too recognizable, too connected to the family name. I'd spent my life trying to escape, so I built a shell, then another, then 10 more. Quiet holding companies with generic names and faceless boards. They were the ones making the bids, signing the deals, buying the land. Over time, Athena's revenue streams allowed me to do more than build a tech empire. I started buying physical space. Entire blocks in undervalued corners of Chicago, historic districts, old warehouses, rundown commercial strips that developers had dismissed as unsalvageable, including the one Carter and Rowe just tried to acquire. They thought they were purchasing an opportunity. What they actually signed was a non-binding letter of intent with a seller who worked for me, because 2 years ago, I bought this entire block through a company called Blue Harbor Holdings, registered in Delaware, operating out of a law office in Evanston. The title was clean, the paperwork is quiet, the ownership is masked. I let them believe they'd close the deal, let them swagger into my store with eviction notices and careless smiles. I wanted to see how far they'd go. Apparently, far enough to put my own father's signature on a document that aimed to erase me. I didn't flinch when I saw it. I didn't need to. Because when you already own the land beneath someone's feet, you don't argue, you wait. The buildings Carter and Rowe hoped to demolish were already mine. And not just this block. In the past 3 years alone, I'd bought 37 commercial properties across the city. Some were dormant, some were under renovation, but all of them were chosen with a plan in mind. Strategic positioning, future value, infrastructure integration. It wasn't just a real estate portfolio. It was leverage. Because while they were building upward, I was building outward, quietly surrounding them, quietly preparing. Athena funded it. The bookstore covered it. And the Carter name, never saw it coming. That was the beauty of it. They thought they'd turned their back on a daughter who failed to meet the family standard. But what they'd really done was turn their back on the one person who'd figured out how to beat them at their own game. And now, the game was almost over. Real power doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention or announce itself in boardrooms. Real power waits. It listens. It learns how the system works, then quietly rewrites the rules. While Bradley was giving interviews about expansion strategy, I was reviewing Carter and Rowe's shareholder disclosures. While Vanessa was hosting charity galas for optics, I was forming shell funds with silent partners. They thought I left the family business for good, but I never actually left. I simply changed the way I entered the room. It started small. A few thousand shares were acquired through a tech investment fund in Boston. Moreover, routed through a university endowment in Oregon, an institution that happened to use Athena's infrastructure for their entire digital library. Each acquisition was modest, intentional, quiet, no red flags, no concentrated ownership. But over time, the pieces added up. By year 3, I controlled just under 7% of Carter and Rowe, enough to be in the room, not enough to alarm them. Yet, in year 4, I moved faster. A pension fund, a publishing consortium, a joint venture with a European tech firm, all legitimate, all clean, and every single one tied back to me. They never looked closely. Why would they? I'd become invisible by design, the daughter who chose books over boardrooms. She walked away from the empire her father built to sell poetry and use novels on a quiet Chicago street. They thought I was harmless. That was my greatest asset. By the time the ink dried on my latest round of acquisitions, I had a controlling interest, just over 51%. Not all in one name, but all under my direction. It didn't trigger any alarms because it wasn't meant to. Every percentage point I gathered was wrapped in enough paperwork to lull any compliance officer to sleep. Even their attorneys missed it. I didn't need a seat at the table. I already owned the table. And the winding shelf. It stayed exactly as it was, dimly lit, lovingly disorganized, forgettable from the outside. But for me, it was more than a symbol. It was home base. The place where every strategy was drafted, every contract is reviewed, every piece of leverage is plotted. The vintage register at the front didn't ring up many sales, but beneath the counter, a secure server linked directly to Athena's encrypted hub. Every shipment of rare books delivered to the store contained more than paper: data storage units, legal binders, deal memos, even the back room, lined with old publishing posters and worn leather chairs, was soundproofed for private meetings no one ever knew happened. They thought they were ignoring me. What they were really doing was clearing the path. Because when people underestimate you, they leave doors unlocked, and I had learned to walk through them without making a sound. Carter and Rowe were about to make an announcement, one that would crown Bradley as heir apparent. But behind the scenes, I already held the crown, and soon, everyone in that glass tower was going to find out. The morning air felt sharper than usual, crisp with the kind of weight that only arrives when something is about to shift. I stood in front of the full-length mirror tucked behind the backroom bookshelf, the same one I'd used to straighten my apron strings for the past 5 years. But today, there was no apron. Today, I wore a charcoal gray suit, tailored, clean lines, the kind of suit you don't wear unless you're walking into a room where people finally need to listen. Lillian Rhodes arrived just after 7, coffee in one hand, a thick folder in the other. Always precise, always one step ahead. She didn't say good morning. She didn't have to. "It's done," she said, placing the folder on the counter. CNBC goes live at 10:15. Wall Street Journal feature hits the wire at 10:20. Barkley and Pierce will release the portfolio breakdown shortly after. They've confirmed all data points. Ownership trail, legal audits, valuation, all airtight. I nodded, then opened the folder. Inside was the final map of everything we'd built: Athena Digital's real valuation, acquisition history, and government contracts, the layers of corporate shells, the controlling stake in Carter and Rowe, and the media plan, polished and timed to the second. A 5-year strategy distilled into 20 glossy pages. This was no longer theory, no longer projection. This was execution. Investor registry was refreshed this morning. Lillian added, "Your name will show up on the system at 9:45 a.m., just before the meeting begins." "And the building?" I asked. "Still locked under Blue Harbor Holdings, legally. Carter and Rowe has no claim. They tried to purchase their own eviction notice." I exhaled slowly. A quiet laugh. Almost. After everything. They still didn't know they'd handed me the final piece the moment they tried to take everything away. The past 5 years had been shadow work. Hidden names, silent filings, legal threads woven so carefully they felt invisible. But invisibility had a time limit, and mine was up. "They'll see me coming now," I said softly. Lillian's eyes met mine. "They won't believe it's you until it's already done." That was always the power of the plan, not just to win, but to do it so thoroughly they'd question how they missed it. The girl in the bookstore, the one they laughed at, walked past, spoke over. Today, she walks into their boardroom holding the deed, the shares, and the narrative. I reached for my laptop. On screen, the Carter and Rowe homepage still featured Bradley's smiling face under a headline about the future of urban development. He had no idea the future was already decided. I closed the lid gently. There was nothing left to adjust. I glanced once more around the shop. The dust motes are dancing in the light. The shelves I'd built by hand. The tiny bell above the door that had rung for every insult, every dismissal, every warning not to dream too loudly. That sound used to sting. Now, it sounded like momentum. "It's time," I said. Lillian smiled. "The car is waiting." And just like that, the door to the winding shelf opened, not with a whisper, but with intent. Because the era of silence was over. ChatGPT deny. The lobby of Carter and Rowe hadn't changed. Still polished to a fault, all marble and glass, designed to impress the moment you stepped through the revolving doors. It was built for power. Visible power. The kind my family understood. But as I crossed that threshold, the silence that followed was louder than any show of wealth. A security guard approached, tablet in hand. "I'm sorry, miss. This floor is restricted." I didn't flinch. "Check the updated registry." He paused, then scanned the list. His eyes stopped, then widened. "Ms. Carter." I. "Yes. Of course. You're clear." I offered a polite smile, then stepped into the elevator alone. The mirrored walls reflected someone my family wouldn't recognize. Not the quiet daughter who left. Not the shopkeeper they mocked. This version didn't need their approval. She came with leverage. As the numbers ticked upward, my phone buzzed. Lillian CNBC dropped the segment. Athena ID confirmed. WSJ live in 5. When the elevator opened, the top floor buzzed with the low chaos of pre-meeting energy. Staff are rushing between conference rooms. Assistants whisper urgently. Screens flickering with updated tickers. Then someone saw me. A pause. A whisper. A ripple. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I walked past the reception desk. Through the hallway I hadn't seen in half a decade. The walls were lined with photos of groundbreaking ceremonies and ribbon cuttings, my father's legacy, framed in gold and arrogance. I stopped just outside the boardroom. The door was slightly ajar. I heard Bradley's voice. "Once the vote passes, we'll begin transitioning oversight. I've got the backing from every..." He froze when I stepped in. Vanessa was mid-sentence and trailed off entirely. She blinked once, then again, as if her mind couldn't quite process the scene in front of her. Madeline Bradley said, half a scoff, "This meeting is for shareholders." "I know," I said, walking in. "Which is why I'm here." He laughed, forced, uncertain. "You're not on the list. Check again." At that moment, a television on the far wall changed. A breaking news banner scrolled across the screen. Athena Digital's founder revealed, Madeline Carter, confirmed as tech billionaire behind 9.1B platform. Vanessa's breath caught. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Around the table, board members were already pulling out their phones. Whispers turned into questions. Bradley's confidence cracked. "This is a joke, right? You run a bookstore. I built Athena Digital," I said evenly. "And I now control 51.4% of Carter and Rowe shares." The room went still. Not one cough, not a single shuffle of paper. "Effective immediately," I continued, placing a thin stack of documents onto the table. "The board will recognize a change in voting authority." Bradley moved toward me, voice rising. "You can't. This is my company." "No," I said quietly. "It was our father's. And while you were busy rehearsing speeches, I was buying the floor beneath your feet." A pause. And then chaos. Phones ringing. Board members are reading updates aloud. A headline flashed on the projector. Carter and Rowe faces shakeup as secret shareholder steps forward. Vanessa finally found her voice. "You planned this." I turned to her, voice calm. "I prepared for this. Because sometimes, the loudest moment isn't when you raise your voice. It's when you finally speak, and no one has anything left to say." Bradley was still sputtering when the doors opened again. Nathan Holloway stepped into the room, calm as ever, a leather briefcase in one hand, an embossed folder in the other. He walked with the ease of someone who already knew how this meeting would end. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice measured. "My name is Nathan Holloway. I represent Madeline Carter in all matters regarding her corporate and real estate holdings. I'm here today to clarify any confusion regarding ownership and voting rights." He placed the folder on the table and flipped it open, revealing neatly tabbed documents, titles, transfer records, shareholder ledgers, trust agreements, and acquisition trails. All of it is clean, all of it verifiable. A few board members leaned in. One of them, a man in his 60s with tortoiseshell glasses, read the cover page, paled slightly, then looked at me. "You own the development block?" he asked. I nodded. "Every building on the street that Carter and Rowe intended to redevelop, including the one your legal team tried to evict me from last week." Vanessa looked down at her phone, scrolling rapidly. Her lips moved without sound, rereading the same headline again and again. Bradley's face was flushed. This is fraud. You manipulated the system, hid behind shell companies. You think that makes you clever?" "No," I said softly. "It makes me strategic." Nathan cleared his throat. "To be clear, Ms. Carter's acquisitions were made legally, through registered entities, with full compliance filings. There was no misrepresentation, simply misperception." Someone near the end of the table chuckled under his breath. Bradley turned on him. "You think this is funny?" "No," the man replied. "I think it's finished." Across the room, phones began buzzing. An assistant rushed in, whispering something into a board member's ear. The board member's eyes went wide. He looked at me, then back at Bradley. "It's happening," he said. "Carter and Rowe stock is dropping. Athena's valuation just surged. The market's reacting." A screen flickered on the wall. A live chart showed Carter and Rowe's shares sliding in real time. while Athena's numbers rose steadily, confidently, backed by a wave of investor momentum and breaking press coverage. Vanessa stood abruptly. "You won't get away with this. This was never yours to take." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. "You were so busy defending a legacy," I said quietly. "You never realized someone was building a future." Nathan laid one final document on the table. A notarized statement confirming my controlling interest, effective immediately. Silence settled again. Not angry, not confused, just final. I turned to Bradley one last time. "You walked into my store to throw me out. Today, I walk into yours to take it back." And no one, not even him, had anything left to say. ChatGPT and I stepped forward, past the stack of legal documents, past the stares of people who had once spoken over me without hesitation. The remote in my hand was small, almost invisible. But the moment I clicked it, the screen behind me came alive, and the last 5 years lit up in full color. The logo of Athena Digital appeared first, clean, sharp, quietly powerful. Then came the dashboard, our core infrastructure, client base, and product suite. Everything I'd spent years building, concealed beneath the dust of a bookstore and the dismissive shadow of my family name. "This," I said evenly, "is what I've been doing while you mocked my little shop." The room was still. Our platform serves 200 institutions across North America. I continued. That includes 116 university systems, 38 medical schools, and 11 government agencies. Athena Digital processes over 12 million active users each month. We're not just in publishing, we are publishing. A new slide appeared: real-time growth charts, client maps, adoption curves. You wanted to know why I walked away from Carter Rowe? Because I saw something bigger. Something that didn't rely on tearing down buildings or selling the skyline to the highest bidder. I wanted to build something that lasted longer than a contract, something that empowered people instead of displacing them. Vanessa shifted in her chair, arms crossed tight, the corner of her mouth twitching like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. I clicked again. The next slide showed an image of the winding shelf, warm light spilling through old glass, books stacked unevenly, a handwritten staff picks sign barely hanging on. "This," I said, "was never the endgame." The bookstore was the quietest room I could find, so I could think, plan, and create. It was my sanctuary. But it was also the perfect cover. The screen is split into two images, the winding shelf on one side, Athena's control servers on the other. Silence wrapped the room again. Not heavy this time, but something closer to awe. "Every time you dismissed me," I said softly, I took a step forward. "Every time you laughed, I signed another deal. Every time you assumed I had failed, I was securing another future." Bradley stared at the screen, but he wasn't really seeing it. He was watching something fall apart, not just a company, but an illusion, one he had spent his entire life believing in. At that moment, the boardroom doors opened. A representative from Barclay and Pierce entered, flanked by two assistants. He moved with the same kind of certainty Nathan had, a man who used to deliver news that changed the course of things. He nodded to me, then turned to the room. "We've completed verification," he announced. "Effective immediately, Madeline Carter will assume full executive oversight of Carter and Rowe development. Transfer of voting power has been acknowledged by all relevant stakeholders. Markets have reacted favorably. There are no legal objections. No one moved. Not Vanessa, not Bradley, not the board, because now it wasn't just me saying it. The world was watching and confirming. I looked out at the table of people who had once decided my value for me. I didn't need to raise my voice. The evidence was louder than anything I could say. ChatGPT Danoi. The silence that followed Barkley and Pierce's confirmation wasn't just stunned. It was surrender. Bradley sat rigid in his chair, the flush of disbelief draining slowly from his face. He didn't speak. For once, he didn't know how. Vanessa kept her gaze fixed on the polished surface of the table, arms crossed so tightly across her chest it looked like she was bracing for impact. The room was waiting for someone to deny it, to challenge it, to reset the balance they had always known. No one did. Finally, Bradley stood. His voice was low, brittle at the edges. "I'll step down." He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. That decision had already been made for him the moment he underestimated the one person he thought was out of the game. Vanessa followed, more out of pride than grace. "I'll be submitting my resignation as well," she said flatly. Effective immediately. She gathered her things with rehearsed poise, but there was no fight left in her movements. Only the quiet panic of someone realizing they'd played the wrong role in the wrong story. The board took it in silently, some surprised, most not. The room understood what was happening. The Carter legacy had shifted. The power wasn't just in new hands. It had always been. No one noticed until today. Then, the door opened again. George Carter stepped inside. His walk was slower than I remembered. His suit, immaculate as always, felt heavier now, like it belonged to a man trying to hold together something that no longer existed. He scanned the room, eyes pausing on the vacant chairs his children had just left. Then he looked at me. There was no anger on his face, no outrage, just the kind of quiet recognition that comes too late to be useful. "So," he said, voice steady, "it's done." I nodded. "Yes." He gave a slow breath, eyes flickering toward the screen still glowing with Athena's interface. "You were never just selling books." "No," I said, "but you were never just building buildings either." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he gave the smallest nod, a gesture that looked more like surrender than approval, and walked out. I turned back to the board. "I'm not here to burn what came before," I said clearly. "But we are no longer going to build for the sake of scale or ego. We're building for resilience, for people, for something that lasts beyond press releases and quarterly wins." I paused, letting the weight of the shift settle. Effective today. Carter and Rowe will move toward a sustainability-first model, smart infrastructure, community integration, digital literacy partnerships with Athena. No more empty towers. No more forgotten corners of the city. We build with purpose now, or we don't build at all. No applause followed, just respect, which was more than enough, because this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about rewriting the rules from the top of the very table they once refused to let me sit at. It was nearly dusk when he arrived. The boardroom was empty now, just the faint echo of chairs pushed back and conversations that had lost their urgency. I stood by the tall windows overlooking the city, the skyline fading into gold and steel. When I heard the door open behind me, George Carter didn't announce himself. He simply stepped in, not as the man who once helmed an empire, but as a father unsure of how to speak to the daughter he no longer recognized. "Madeline," he said, carefully, like the name might break in his mouth. I turned, calm, steady. "Dad." He looked around the room, as if seeing it for the first time. Not the boardroom he'd ruled for decades, but a space that no longer belonged to him. "I thought I had more time," he said finally, "to set things right, to pass it on properly." "You did," I replied. "You just never looked in the right direction." He offered a tired smile. "Not bitter, just old. I taught your brother how to lead, taught Vanessa how to close, but you never listened." "No," I said quietly. I watched. That seemed to land. He walked toward the table but didn't sit. And now, I own every major holding Carter and Rowe was built on. I said, the infrastructure, the permits, the land your legacy rested on. It's all under Athena's umbrella. He nodded slowly. Even the downtown development, I met his eyes. Especially that one. You called it your crown jewel. He let out a dry breath of something between a laugh and a sigh. It was supposed to be your brother's first solo project. I didn't flinch. Now, it's my first integrated model site. Affordable housing meets public access to digital education. We break ground next month. He didn't respond. Not right away. He just looked at me. And for the first time in a long time, he truly saw me. Why keep the bookstore? He asked softly. Now that, everything's out in the open. I glanced out the window again, then back at him. Because it reminds me who I am when no one's watching. It was the one place I was never pretending. He let that settle. And now he asked again. Quieter this time. What happens to us? I didn't answer right away. Because part of me didn't know, and part of me did. You gave me your silence when I needed your voice. I said. You gave me distance when I needed space to grow. I took both, and I built something you never saw coming. He nodded, eyes glassy, but proud, pride edged in regret. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. You were always the quiet one, he said. Turns out, you were just listening. And then he was gone, back into the hallway where his name was no longer carved in marble, and I stayed. In the seat he never thought I'd earn, because I didn't need to inherit power. I had already learned how to build it. ChatGPT'd and I. The morning light filtered through the storefront glass of the winding shelf, soft and golden, the way it always had. But something felt different. Not on the shelves. They were still slightly crooked. Not in the books. They still leaned against one another like old friends. No. The difference was in the nameplate. It had been mounted quietly at dawn, just below the original hand-painted sign that still read, The Winding Shelf. The new plaque gleamed in brushed brass, simple and understated, but impossible to miss. Madeline Carter, owner, Carter and Rowe and Athena Digital Publishing. It wasn't a declaration of victory. It was a confirmation of truth. The bell above the door chimed as I stepped inside, just like it always had. That familiar sound, once filled with hesitation and quiet hope, now carried a different weight. Not finality, not retreat. Beginning. The same small counter still held a jar of bookmarks and a chipped ceramic mug full of pens. But now, behind it, a second monitor hummed to life, linked directly to Athena's server farm in Boston, its screen glowing with live analytics and platform updates. A quiet reminder this wasn't the end of something old. It was the layering of something new. A soft knock tapped at the glass from outside. Lillian stood with a coffee in one hand, smiling as she pointed up at the new nameplate. I opened the door. You really want to keep both? She asked gently. This place and everything else I do, I said. The bookstore reminds me that building something real never needs to be loud. She handed me the coffee. Investors are already calling it the quietest power play of the decade. I smiled. Let them call it what they want. I know what it really is. It was home. It was patience turned into strategy. It was silence, sharpened into vision. That evening, just as I was locking up, a teenager wandered in, backpack slung low, earbuds dangling. The kind of kid who wouldn't care who owned what. Do you have any Vonnegut? He asked. A little uncertain? Yeah, I said, walking him toward the back shelf. I think you'll like Slaughterhouse-Five. As I handed him the book, the bell chimed once more behind us. But this time, it didn't sound like something ending. It sounded like something beginning again. They thought the bookstore was the end of my story. But it was only the beginning. From the shelves of the winding shelf to the top floor of Carter Rowe, I didn't just take back what they tried to erase. I rewrote it entirely. If you've ever built something powerful in silence or turned doubt into fuel, share it in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of quiet strength and undeniable rise. Because sometimes, the softest footsteps leave the deepest mark.